The paddock hums with numbers, algorithms, and simulations, but in Casey Stoner's voice there is no data. Only truth, raw and unvarnished, a truth that feels like gravel hitting the visor at 300 kilometers per hour. We no longer see these incredible images of slides, of riders fighting to keep the front wheel on the ground. Everything is done for them. We're making champions out of engineers, not riders. His warning slices through the haze of optimism like the shriek of a downshifting engine at the edge of destruction, and suddenly the illusion of progress feels fragile, almost fraudulent. Because MotoGP was never meant to be clean. It was meant to be violent, improvised, a ballet on the brink of chaos where every high side was a reminder that genius and catastrophe share the same corner. Today, electronics erase the scars, smoothing the fury into consistency, and the sport risks trading its poetry for protocol, its soul for spreadsheets. Stoner's lament is not nostalgia but vision, an echo from a time when riders fought machines with their bare instincts, when sweat and fear, not code, decided the outcome. He speaks for the purity of racing, for the trembling hands gripping the throttle not knowing if the bike will obey or betray, for the beauty of a sport defined by the possibility of failure. And in his voice we hear more than criticism. We hear grief, defiance, and a plea. Remember the images, the slides, the fight to keep the front wheel kissing the sky, because without the MotoGP risks becoming something fast, safe, and soulless. And so, in the very season where Marc Márquez's return with Ducati has set MotoGP ablaze, Casey Stoner's voice breaks through the roar of engines, turning triumph into tension and reminding us that the greatest drama of 2025 may not be fought on the track, but within the soul of the sport itself. MotoGP 2025 has unfolded like a script no one dared to write, a season both intoxicating and terrifying, where every lap feels like destiny tightening its grip and every finish line less an ending than a question left open. Marc Márquez, resurrected in scarlet Ducati colors, has not merely returned to form but reshaped the grid with an authority that leaves rivals blinking in disbelief, using braking stability and impossible corner entries to make circuits bow to his will. Pecco Bagnaia, once the golden boy of precision, finds himself destabilized, while Jorge Martín wrestles with demons no telemetry can measure, his right hand betraying him as if the throttle itself had become a mirror reflecting his doubts. The paddock hums with disbelief as engineers shuffle data, yet no algorithm can decode the raw violence of Márquez's improvisation, his ability to slide the rear tire just enough to flirt with chaos without surrendering to it. One mechanic whispered that Ducati's rear ride height device reached record activation rates at Mugello, a detail that shows how the system claws at asphalt while Márquez bends the bike into lines no simulation could predict. Through the roar and the numbers, a silence cracked open when Casey Stoner appeared, a ghost of greatness stepping back into the paddock with eyes that saw further than results, eyes that recognized the dangerous beauty beneath the spectacle. He did not race, yet his presence sliced through the din, carrying the weight of words sharpened by distance and years of silence, his calm voice landing with more force than the shriek of any engine. Against this Márquez, it would be difficult, Stoner admitted, his voice mixing respect with foreboding. With the one before, maybe I'd have a chance, but now he seems to have something more, and the garage seemed to exhale an uneasy agreement. It was a confession that stripped away bravado, a recognition that genius is never static but mutates, leaving even past champions gasping for relevance in an era that constantly rewrites definitions of mastery. Inside his own mind, Márquez might whisper, I have bent the machine to my will, but how long before the machine bends me? The thought is fragile and persistent as the crack that can turn a carbon brake disc into dust at 340 kilometers per hour. Such a thought clings like exhaust fumes, unseen but suffocating, as the season barrels forward with no pause, carrying riders through airports and circuits until time dissolves into monotony. Every race becomes a theater where courage and doubt wrestle, and every overtake feels like a cliff's edge approached at 350 kilometers per hour, the roar of engines swelling like waves smashing against cliffs. The drama does not lie only in who wins, but in how the victories are carved, how the seconds stretch like molten glass between glory and disaster, each millisecond bending into eternity before it shatters into applause or silence. For the first time in years, MotoGP feels less like a championship and more like a storm, chaotic and cleansing, yet also destructive, a storm that strips away illusions and leaves the raw outlines of strength and fragility. Bagnaia's corner entries falter by centimeters, Martín's wrist stiffens under acceleration, and the stopwatch exposes their fragility without mercy, a tool that cuts deeper than any blade forged by hands. Spectators may see only numbers on a screen, but within the helmets, sweat burns the eyes and the mind becomes a battlefield of whispers, where self-belief must fight against the rising tide of fear with every twist of the wrist. Stoner's return was not nostalgic. It was surgical, a voice cutting through illusions, reminding everyone that dominance can mask decay, that beneath the shine of victory may lie cracks widening with each unchecked lap. His words echoed through garages like a bell tolling at dawn, stirring mechanics, riders, and fans alike to question what future awaits this sport, their hands pausing mid-task as if the air itself had thickened into doubt. The air in Austria felt heavy, charged not with celebration but with the unsettling sense that MotoGP was racing faster than its soul could follow, a dissonance between spectacle and essence that no champagne could drown. And when the engines fell silent, the only sound that mattered was Stoner's warning, as if the past itself had stepped forward to announce, "The drama has only just begun, and from this beginning there may be no easy return." Casey Stoner's words cut deeper than statistics, a scalpel slicing into the essence of MotoGP with a blunt verdict that could not be ignored, because he dared to say what many whispered but feared to shout, standing unshielded in a paddock that thrives on silence more than dissent. He argued that the sport, once defined by the raw communion of rider and machine, was being hollowed out by electronics that smoothed every rough edge until the soul itself seemed sanded down. "Right now, we're making champions out of engineers," he declared with quiet fury. "We're not making champions out of riders. We're going into an era of all the mistakes that Formula One made," and the paddock fell into uneasy silence. Those who grew up watching Stoner tame wild Ducati beasts at Phillip Island understood the weight of his warning, for he spoke from the memory of riding motorcycles that demanded bravery at every corner exit. The difference was not abstract but technical. Traction control now calculates throttle response thousands of times per second through sensors and wheel speed data, leaving riders to feel more like pilots of code than gladiators of speed. Telemetry shows torque curves flattened by intervention, yet what it hides is the erosion of instinct, the loss of that moment when a rider must wrestle the machine with nothing but touch, faith, and the silent memory of past near crashes. Stoner admitted that for him, the joy had drained away when every wheel spin was caught, every slide neutralized, every mistake softened into numbers rather than scars. He confessed once more with brutal simplicity, "You can literally go and twist the throttle. You've got nearly 300 horsepower and you can twist the throttle and nothing happens. You've got the best riders in the world riding the easiest bikes to ride in the world, and I don't see this as being anything that I'm interested in." And in that instant, his disdain carried more weight than any victory lap. It was less an attack than a lament, a recognition that MotoGP risked becoming a sport where danger was simulated, not lived, where spectacle was choreographed by engineers rather than born in chaos. Inside, a rider might whisper to himself, "Am I mastering the bike, or is the bike mastering me?" A thought that grows louder every time the dashboard light blinks to confirm another invisible correction. For engineers, the data tells a story of safety, but for Stoner, it tells a story of detachment, as if the living heartbeat of the sport had been replaced by the sterile rhythm of numbers endlessly scrolling across screens. The irony burns. In the quest to protect riders from the violence of highsides, the system has quietly stripped away the very artistry that made MotoGP transcendent, leaving riders with less room to be extraordinary. It is like a painter forced to trace perfect lines on graph paper, precision preserved but imagination extinguished, the canvas sterile where once it roared with color and imperfection. Fans who crave unpredictability sense it too, noticing how overtakes seem rehearsed, how tire management has replaced instinctive daring, how the differences between bikes blur into a gray sameness. Stoner's critique does not reject progress but demands a balance, a recognition that racing is meant to expose flaws, not erase them, because it is in the flaws where greatness is revealed. The technicians defend themselves with charts and equations, yet the track tells a different story, one of gaps that rarely close, of processions instead of battles, of outcomes too predictable to feel alive. One detail rarely discussed outside closed debriefs is that predictive algorithms now simulate a rider's optimal line before he even attempts it, shrinking the margin for surprise and making the wild genius of improvisation almost obsolete. Stoner, once a master of improvisation, sees the danger more clearly than anyone because he knows what it means to ride a machine that tries to kill you and what it means when that danger is tamed by silicon rather than skill. The climax of his warning is not technical but human. If MotoGP becomes a place where riders are passengers inside engineered certainty, then the very reason for watching begins to dissolve, eroded lap after lap, fading like dust in the winter wind. And so his words hang in the air like smoke after a crash, bitter and unavoidable, reminding all who listen that the cost of making racing safe might be the slow death of racing itself. Marc Márquez rides as if he were born in a different age, his instincts sharpened not by electronics, but by the raw terror of motorcycles that once spat their riders to the ground without warning. And it is this inheritance that sets him apart. He thrives not on calculation but on improvisation, the subtle art of feeling traction disappear beneath him and somehow finding a line through chaos, a quality the younger generation, raised on electronics, struggles to imitate. Casey Stoner, who knows better than most what it means to dance on the edge of disaster, conceded with rare humility. Against this Márquez, it would be difficult. With the one before, maybe I'd have a chance, but now he seems to have something more. That something more is not a statistic but a memory, the memory of learning to ride without traction control, without anti-wheelie software, without the digital net that now catches mistakes before they fully form. Stoner added, Marc knows how to ride a bike without all these controls because he remembers the past. And in that single sentence, he explained the gulf between Márquez and the rest of the grid. Riders raised inside the comfort of electronics cannot reproduce the instincts forged in fear, for courage shaped without danger is only theory. Márquez makes corners into theaters of improvisation, places where millimeters become eternity, where his elbow grazes asphalt not as a stunt but as necessity. Inside his helmet, one can imagine him thinking, if the limit is invisible, then I will make it visible with my body, a private mantra turned into spectacle. Stoner went further, observing, when someone like Marc comes along and does things you don't expect, it's not easy to accept. But I don't think it's only Pecco who has problems with Márquez. They all have them. And indeed Bagnaia, Ducati's former golden boy, has found himself overshadowed in his own garage, his precision and consistency drowned by Márquez's storm of invention. Yet Stoner offered him a paradoxical gift. Having a teammate like Márquez could be one of the best things for him. Maybe not for this year. It might take him a while to come out of this moment, but if he can, thanks also to Christian Gabarini, he can learn a lot from Marc and become stronger. Strength forged in defeat is harsher than victory, yet it is precisely that crucible that shapes champions capable of rebirth. Jorge Martín, too, has fallen into darkness after his world title. Every race since that triumph an echo of frustration, but Stoner reminded him that even Márquez himself once looked lost. He became world champion, and immediately after that he had one bad race after another. You learn more and find resources in your character on the worst days. We saw that with Márquez as well. He looked like he couldn't get back to the top, and look where he is now. There's no reason why he can't fight for the title next year. These words carried more than consolation. They carried the authority of experience, the voice of a man who knows that failure is not a wall but a mirror. Technicians whisper that Márquez manipulates Ducati's torque maps with an almost uncanny feel, knowing exactly how much spin the electronics will permit before stepping in, and this micro-awareness gives him an invisible weapon. His rivals look at the same dashboards, but where they trust the system, he reads its limits and pushes through them, treating electronics as a suggestion rather than a command. Watching him is like watching a sculptor carve marble while blindfolded, each gesture unplanned yet precise, each corner exit a sculpture of speed made from risk and faith. The climax of this story is not merely Márquez's resurgence, but the reminder that MotoGP still contains men who ride beyond software, whose essence belongs to a past not yet buried. And so Márquez remains the last gladiator, a rider who makes the present feel like history unfolding in real time, proving that even in an age of machines, the soul of a human can still decide the outcome. The announcement of MotoGP's new anti-high-side stability system arrived with a polished language of safety, yet in Casey Stoner's eyes it rang like a false alarm, a cure more dangerous than the disease it claimed to prevent. Engineers promoted it as progress, a safeguard against the violent rear-wheel launches that had scarred generations, but Stoner looked past the press releases and saw the hidden cost. I don't see it as being safer, he said with blunt precision. If you take all of the control out of the rear of the bike, you lose any fear of the bike, and then you just start to push harder and harder in one aspect, which is the front end. Then if you lose the front end, so often it comes back onto the track, and we've seen catastrophic accidents when that happens. His words hung heavy because they reversed the logic everyone wanted to believe, revealing that safety could create its own form of danger. The human mind adapts quickly. Take away fear from one place, and it will seek risk somewhere else. And in racing, that risk often gathers at the front tire, thin as a coin between grip and disaster. A small, almost invisible detail confirmed his warning. In Austria, pressure sensors recorded multiple riders exceeding maximum brake force thresholds, a sign that the absence of rear fear had shifted every gamble forward. Inside a helmet, a rider might whisper to himself, "If the rear won't bite me, Then I will lean harder until the front does, a monologue both defiant and doomed. Practice sessions at the Red Bull Ring became evidence, with riders sliding wide under braking, the geometry of control collapsing at exactly the point Stoner had predicted. Watching from a paddock, his expression was not triumphant but weary, the face of someone who had seen the cycle of mistakes repeated with different names. The system was supposed to erase the violence of high sides, but in doing so it created a subtler cruelty, one that turned crashes into ricochets, bikes snapping back onto the racing line like iron trapped in a magnet's pull. Stoner understood the paradox. When fear is removed, respect disappears, and respect is the invisible barrier that keeps riders alive at the edge. The metaphor is clear. Take a candle from a dark room, and you may banish shadows, but you also reveal the walls closing in, leaving less space to breathe. The riders adapt because they must, but adaptation here means gambling with forces more unpredictable than the rear slide ever was. Engineers defend themselves with simulations showing reduced high-side incidents, yet simulations cannot replicate the panic of a front collapse at 250 kilometers per hour. The irony is bitter. What was meant to save riders may, in its own way, endanger them more deeply by shifting danger rather than eliminating it. Fans watching on television saw only runoffs and gravel plumes, but those in the paddock felt the chill in Stoner's prophecy becoming reality. The climax of his argument is simple yet devastating. MotoGP cannot escape danger. It can only move it, and in moving it from one wheel to the other, it may have transformed a visible enemy into a hidden assassin. And so the illusion of safety lingers like smoke in the air, a haze that comforts until it blinds, leaving everyone to wonder whether the cure has quietly become another disease. The 2027 regulations were unveiled with a promise of renewal, a vision of MotoGP reborn through smaller 850 cubic centimeters engines, lighter bikes, reduced aero, and the removal of ride height devices. Yet for Casey Stoner, the announcement felt like a mirage shimmering on tarmac. Officials framed the changes as a return to pure racing, but Stoner looked through the technical bullet points and saw only another layer of compromise. Not even remotely close, he warned with clinical bluntness. You're making the bike lighter, so then the braking point becomes less. You're actually going to be slower at the top speed because they don't have this ride height device now. So it's going to be less top speed, which means a lighter bike. Going into the corner, braking points are shorter, less opportunity for overtaking. His critique dismantled the optimism line by line, exposing the unintended consequences hidden beneath the surface. A lighter bike might sound agile, yet in reality it shortens the approach to corners, reducing overtaking zones into slivers of asphalt too narrow for drama. Aerodynamic downgrades, meant to cut turbulence, may paradoxically create more dirty air by destabilizing airflow patterns riders have only just learned to manage. Engineers whisper that CFD simulations already predict turbulent wakes at mid-straight speeds, a technical footnote that suggests following another rider may soon feel like chasing shadows. Inside, a younger rider might think, if they take away my tools, how will I create the difference? A quiet monologue of doubt masked by press conference smiles. Stoner knows the answer. Without variety in machinery, without technical asymmetry, the grid becomes a procession, each rider trapped inside identical limitations. It is like replacing a symphony of instruments with a row of metronomes, precise but devoid of melody, relentless in rhythm yet empty of surprise. Fans may dream of wheel-to-wheel chaos, but reduced braking zones shrink the canvas where battles are painted, leaving only the faint outlines of what used to be overtakes of legend. For teams, the shift is financial as well as technical, demanding redesigns of chassis and electronics that may cost millions yet deliver less spectacle. Stoner's frustration is not nostalgia but foresight, a recognition that rules made in boardrooms often forget the visceral truth of trackside combat. He recalls how similar ideas once promised salvation in Formula One, only to breed sterile races that drove fans away, a warning MotoGP seems determined to ignore. The technicians argue for balance, yet balance here risks flattening the very peaks of greatness that made riders into legends. Stoner insists that unpredictability cannot be engineered by subtraction. It must be allowed to breathe through difference, danger, and the chaos of opportunity. The climax of his critique is unforgiving. If the 2027 rules arrive as written, MotoGP may trade its ferocity for neatness, its spectacle for order, its chaos for predictability. And so the so-called reset looms less like a rebirth and more like a slow suffocation, a false dawn painted in regulations, where the sunrise looks bright but hides a sky already dimming. Casey Stoner has always been blunt, But his most haunting warnings arrive when he draws MotoGP's future in the mirror of Formula One's past, a reflection the sport desperately wishes not to see yet cannot turn away from. He knows that overengineering is not a path forward but a slow erosion, because he watched how F1 once bled itself dry with technology that strangled spectacle and left fans staring at empty straights. Each step they do in this direction is making it go in the wrong way, Stoner cautioned, his voice carrying the weight of someone who has already seen the movie and knows the ending. We've had all these examples in the past of these things not working. Yet, we're just following in all of the directions of every issue that Formula One spent years getting rid of. The words landed like a verdict because they carried precedent, not just opinion, reminding everyone that history repeats itself when arrogance blinds decision-makers. Formula One nearly collapsed under the weight of wind tunnels, aero maps, and complex fuel strategies, and only drastic rewrites saved it. MotoGP's Stoner fears may not be so lucky. A little-known detail underscores his anxiety. Simulations show that with current aero loads, bikes generate wake turbulence measurable in wind tunnel vortices at 200 kilometers per hour, patterns eerily similar to F1's dirty air problem of a decade ago. Inside, a rider might mutter to himself, "If I can't get close enough to attack, what am I even racing for?" The monologue of frustration that echoes louder than any exhaust. Stoner adds another wound to the diagnosis. We no longer see these incredible images of slides, of riders fighting to keep the front wheel on the ground. Everything is done for them. It is not nostalgia but evidence, because MotoGP once thrived on variety. Yamaha's mid-corner grip, Ducati's brute speed, Honda's balance, Suzuki's braking mastery, and that ecosystem of difference made every track a unique theater. Now, as electronics and aero mold every machine into the same silhouette, variety dies, and with it the tension that made racing unpredictable. It is like walking into a gallery where every painting has been repainted in the same color, different frames surrounding identical canvases, precision without imagination. Engineers celebrate the sameness because it means optimization, but fans feel the absence, their eyes searching for sparks that used to leap across styles, brands, and riders. Stoner does not despise progress, but he despises homogeneity, the flattening of the sport into something so efficient it risks becoming irrelevant. His lament recalls the long nights when Formula One cars lapped quickly but never together, when passes were rare enough to be replayed for weeks, a desert of spectacle disguised as competition. If MotoGP repeats that path, Stoner believes, the sport will lose not only battles on track but the trust of those who still believe racing is a theater of risk. In the paddock, his words feel like thunder behind closed doors, a storm no one wants to name but everyone hears rumbling. Technicians answer with metrics, insisting safety and parity demand these choices, but their language of percentages cannot erase the silence that lingers in fans' hearts. The climax of Stoner's warning is brutal in its simplicity. If MotoGP insists on copying Formula One's mistakes, it may inherit not its survival, but its darkest years. And so the ghost of another sport hovers over the paddock, a spectral reminder that technology without restraint can empty grandstands faster than any crash, and that what once nearly destroyed Formula may first now be waiting at MotoGP's door. Casey Stoner's words sting, because they come not from theory, but from a man who once stood at the summit and chose to walk away, abandoning glory at the age of 27 when others would have clung to it with bleeding hands. His retirement was not weakness but clarity, a decision born of disillusionment with a sport that he felt was drifting away from its essence, and that clarity gives his voice today an almost prophetic tone. At 39, healthier, calmer, and no longer consumed by the weight of competition, he does not speak out of bitterness but out of love, a love sharpened by distance and strengthened by absence. We're making champions out of engineers, not riders, he warns again, each repetition not redundancy but emphasis, as though he knows the phrase may one day be remembered as the epitaph of an era. That single line has become a mantra whispered across garages, a reminder that speed alone does not equal soul, that precision without peril does not equal racing. Stoner's life is itself a paradox, because the very machines that gave him fame also gave him the insight to see their dangers more clearly than those still trapped inside them. Fans who remember his Phillip Island dominance know that he was no romantic. He was clinical, relentless, merciless on track, and so his nostalgia cannot be dismissed as softness. The technical detail behind his critique is subtle but piercing. Modern ECU strategies now adjust torque delivery corner by corner, effectively scripting how riders accelerate, a hidden choreography that erases improvisation. Inside a helmet, a rider might ask himself, if the bike already knows what to do, then what is left for me? And that question is heavier than any crash because it strikes at identity. Stoner's distance from the sport sharpens this perspective. He has nothing to lose, no sponsors to appease, no contracts to protect, only the purity of truth. He has become like an exiled poet returning to the city he once loved, finding its streets paved over and its songs drowned in noise, unable to stay silent as the transformation erases its soul. The metaphor is apt. MotoGP without risk is like a violin without strings, beautiful in form but mute in expression, stripped of the very tension that creates music. Yet the paradox deepens because 2025 has also given us Márquez, a man who rides as if the past still breathes in his bones, proving that raw genius can still cut through the circuitry. Is this contrast that makes the moment so unbearable? The greatest rider of his generation shining brighter than ever, while the sport itself drifts toward uniformity. Stoner does not deny Márquez's brilliance. Instead, he frames it as the last living proof of what MotoGP once was and could be again. His words therefore carry not only critique but grief, the grief of a man watching beauty dissolve into efficiency. Engineers insist that safety, parity, and cost control demand these steps, yet their arguments collapse against the sound of Stoner's warning echoing in every fan's heart. For what he truly fears is not just the loss of spectacle, but the loss of humanity, the erasure of the intangible bond between rider, machine, and danger. The climax of his lament is piercing. MotoGP may be faster, safer, and cleaner than ever, yet if it forgets the human struggle at its core, it risks becoming a spectacle without soul. And so Stoner's voice hangs in the air like the final note of a requiem, not condemning the sport to death but begging it to remember what kept it alive, a love too pure to be silenced.